there, welcome. I am Mike Montague, Global Head of Content at Sandler Training, and I am joined by Antonio Garrido. He is one of our Sandler authors and trainers in Miami, and today we're going to be talking about virtual ride-alongs. How do you improve teams' performance during the era of social distancing and all of the remote selling and virtual selling that we've been doing the last couple of days. So a lot of good stuff planned for you this afternoon. We got about an hour. And if you're not familiar with Sandler, we are the world's largest sales training organization with over 250 locations, 17 countries. We train over 30,000 people a year. And we've been doing ride-alongs, coaching, tactical coaching, helping salespeople and sales managers grow, helping salespeople sell more easily, helping them become sales managers, helping sales managers become sales leaders. And this new book you see on the screen here, Antonio, you got a copy with you there too, is the 21st Century Ride-Along. Came out this year. Congratulations, Antonio, on the book, and it came out right before all hell broke loose. So those ride-alongs have become virtual, right? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the intention wasn't to write a book that was exclusively, for the virtual ride-along, but as it happened, the COVID appeared about 15 minutes before the book was released, but that's okay. The whole book is about the 21st century ride-along, which obviously includes lots of tech, and we find ourselves in a virtual world at the moment that's selling, managing, training, leading. So it fits right in. So everything that's in the book can entirely apply to the position that we find ourselves in right now.
I think that's one of the cool things about Sandler is we collect best practices from around the world. So they're not really limited to industry, to who you're selling to, or the circumstances and the time. We try and focus on those timeless principles that work no matter how you do them. So one of those things that David Sandler wrote in the You Can't Teach a Kid to Ride a Bike book is that learning is a process. So chances are in this next hour, you're not going to become the ninja mind reader of a sales manager that can solve any sales challenge for your people on one virtual ride along. That's not really our goal. And there's a lot of material in the book. There's even more that we train sales managers and other sales leaders on throughout the year. But we're going to try and pack in as much content as we can in the next hour. Antonio has put a ton of great stuff from the book into this hour for you. So we're going to give you a ton of awareness and knowledge about things that are possible, but we can't do really skill building on a virtual webinar. So you're going to have to practice these things. You're going to have to go out on your next webinar or your next ride along. And then eventually, if you do enough ride alongs, you can get to mastery. And that's where we're trying to get you to. So if you have any questions after the webinar, we didn't cover something that you wanted to, you can get the book and get additional Sandler resources at sandler.com/ridealong. Those are the special gifts for attending the webinar today. We'll throw that up again when we get to the end. Now it's your turn to participate and help us shape the rest of the conversation here. What are your biggest challenges when trying to coach your team? How are you coaching them up here during COVID, during the pandemic, during, really maybe just you already had a distributed sales force and not much has changed. What are you doing and where are you getting stuck when trying to improve your team's performance? Antonio, I'll ask you first as we see the thoughts come here on the webinar. Where do most people get stuck?
Great question. I'll speak from personal experience. When I first started doing ride-alongs, and there was woeful little training, right? So I wasn't very good at it. I didn't have a process. I didn't quite know what I was supposed to do. I didn't really know how I was supposed to help, my people. And so I didn't have a lot of confidence in doing it. There was a lot of issues. And I think, I guess basically, process was my biggest weakness, and we talk about a lot of those things in the book, to help you do that. I also think I really kind of misunderstood what the whole point of the ride along was for the first few months, but picked it up after a while and have been doing it for, well, too long, 20, 30 years, something like that. So yeah, I've done hundreds and hundreds and yeah, probably thousands.
I think you hit on that one for me, and I'm seeing some people type in similar things that would go back to the purpose of the ride along, right? That you're not trying to be Big Brother, you're not trying to catch salespeople doing the wrong thing, you're not trying to sell it for them and fix problems or rescue deals. That's not the point of
No,
ride-alongs either, and that's really where a lot of the mistakes come from, is just the wrong setup, right? And then we also have this framework of the success triangles. If you're familiar with Sandler, you've seen a lot, but all of these problems people are typing in here in the chat fall into one of these three buckets: attitude, behavior, and technique. You want to tell us about these as they relate to a ride-along?
sure, and this is a really good place to start, actually, Mike, because we do believe, right, and we've believed for, I don't know, what, 52 years or so, that to succeed at anything, right, whether that's selling or managing or leading or a ride along, whatever it is, to succeed at anything is the right combination of the right kinds of behaviors, the right kinds of attitudes, and the right kinds of skill and technique. Okay, so with that as a principle, what we find with most of our sales managers and leaders is they typically try to manage all three of those areas, right? So they'll try to manage people's behaviors, which is the correct thing to do, as long as they do it in the right way. But they also try to manage people's attitudes and try to manage people's skills. And that's a big mistake, right? So when we think about people's behaviors, we have to manage the what, so we manage the behaviors, but it's a bit like if you're a hammer, then everything looks like a nail, right? You've got to use the right tool for the job. So if we're trying to help change somebody's attitude or beliefs or the whole kind of value system, then you can't manage that. So you have to coach that. So you coach the why, so you coach the attitude, and then you train skill. You can't manage skill, you can't coach skill, you train skill. So you train the how. So you manage the what, coach the why, and train the how. And the beauty of the ride along is it allows you to see in real time, in a real situation. I don't want to say in the thick of the fight, because that gives you the wrong impression, but live applications of how are they structuring their activities, what does their behavior look like, how are their attitude affecting, could be equal business stature, it could be their ability to ask questions, it could be their drive and ambition, it could be whatever, and then to actually see in real time what actual weaknesses are in their skills and techniques. So the ride along, whether it's virtual or quote unquote real or face to face maybe, helps the manager understand each of these three areas. So it's my genuine belief, which is one of the reasons I wrote the book, that the ride along actually helps the leader, or the manager, to improve their team more quickly than anything else. It's the best B12 shot that you can give your team as quickly as possible for huge impact, huge results as quickly as possible. So because all of these three things are revealed. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes a ton of sense, and we can zoom in and use cold calling as an example. But I like that, because I think when you're maybe a rookie manager, or maybe you're just trying to move too fast, you just want to tell people how to do it, right?
Right.
And that's not training them. Or even you skip the why because it's going to take too long to explain, or they're not going to really get it. And so you just say, well, just do this. And
Right.
that's only managing the what. That's not fixing those other two areas.
That's right. And so, for example, here's a cold call, and I think this is a really good example to make, because you can ride along a cold call, you can ride along a service call, you can ride along a customer complaint, you can ride you can ride along a meeting, right? An internal meeting doesn't have to be an external meeting. But as a cold caller, for example, what a lot of managers might do, or sales managers, is they may concentrate on the behavior piece on the bottom left-hand side of this. In other words, they'll say, hey, I want you to make 20 cold calls a day. Just as an example, I'm not saying that that's got to fit your world, and I'm not saying your world is a cold call world. My point being that if the issue is cold calls, and the manager just says to the individual, hey, I want you to make 20 calls a day, and all they're doing is managing the behavior piece. So what they can then do is measure the quantity of dials, the prospect profile, the times, the scripts, the tools, and, right? But unless the individual understands, right, why we're making these calls, and has the right attitude towards call, has the right equal business stature, and really believes the company's value proposition, then just making the dials isn't going to make them succeed. And then at the same time, right? If they don't get permission, the questioning skills aren't good enough, they're not very good at active listening or building bonding rapport, and, then the manager can see that for real, which is why every coach and every manager of every sporting, whatever your team is, or entertainer, musician, anything, where the manager, their coach watches them do the thing every single day. And yet salespeople, for some reason, they kind of think, well, I've got 10, I've been doing this for 5 years, I don't need a manager to come and show me what to do. Well, if it's good enough for Tiger Woods, it's good enough for you. Do you know what I mean? So that's kind of why the book was written as well.
And then before we get into, the hows, I think there's a few things to talk about on the common mistakes. So again, we like to start with, what are you experiencing? Where are you in this coaching thing? And maybe get you to realize some awareness of things that other people have struggled with. And then we'll promise we'll solve these problems before we get to the end. But here's 3 big ones when you're trying to get somebody else to change their behavior, whether they're your child, your employee, your salesperson, your spouse. If you're trying to get anybody else to do something, it's pretty tough, right?
It is tough, and depending, as I said just seconds ago, and I don't, doesn't have to be tight. Lionel Messi, right, best soccer player in the world, right? They are, for some reason, they're entirely okay with being coached every single day. In fact, if their coach wasn't giving them enough attention, they'd be grumpy. They wouldn't be happy, right? And kind of a lot of salespeople and customer service people and managers, they think, well, you pay me to do my job, let me get on with my job, right? And they get a bit sulky if someone's like, quote unquote, looking over their shoulder, which is entirely the wrong. It's like 180 the wrong way. The other mistake that some managers make is they say, let me show you how to do it. I'll show you, right? Which is like, I got 4 children, and I can ride a bike all day up and down the street, but if my kid doesn't act, they can watch me ride a bike all day, a bit like the book you mentioned earlier, right? I could ride a bike all day until they get on a bike, right? And that's the best way to learn how to not fall off a bike, is to fall off a bike, right? And so a lot of managers, they step in, they think, he's blowing this, let me show you how it's done, and that's terrible. And then a lot of people get very nervous when their boss is around, right? Because they don't want to be judged, and they don't want to be seen to mess up, and so they're scared and fearful, and then people stop being creative, they stop being themselves, and it's a nightmare. So there's all of these things at play, and we have to address them all if we're going to be successful at this.
Yeah, I think you're right there, and there's a bunch more common mistakes too. So those are the 3 buckets. But when we look specifically about ride-alongs, there's another, 7 things here that happen because, or maybe those mistakes are caused because you're not doing these 7 things, right?
Yeah, I think, we reviewed, polled, studied hundreds of ride-alongs, and whilst the list of mistakes is vast, these kind of 7 buckets gather it all. So if you're a sales manager or a leader, if you're not having a formalized, if a ride-along is just a once a year, just a one-off, and that's it, then that's pointless, right? And so it's got to be part of some kind of regular, organized plan, right? Because if you just have it once a year, then the other individual just thinks it's a performance development review, and it isn't a performance development review, right? Or they think, my boss is coming along with me, time to talk about my salary, and it's not that either, right? So make sure it's part of a plan. Mistakes also occur when the agenda for the ride-along isn't understood, and also it's been set up properly in the upfront contract. It's a thing that we believe in very heavily. That the roles for the person, the people, aren't defined and adhered to, right? So is the manager leading this? Is the manager observing this? Is the manager participating in this? And it also, if the client or the prospect can also see the manager, that needs to be defined also for the client, right? Or the prospect. They need to know what roles you guys are playing, right? The leader needs to understand that this isn't, I'm telling you what to do. This isn't to use our kind of language that we talk about in the book, this isn't the use of directed authority. This isn't an opportunity for that, right? This is coaching and developing your people. That's what it's about. Talk again about that cadence where where everybody understands that this is a thing that happens very regularly, and even the clients and customers know, and this is part of your MO, right? This is how you develop your people. You actually serve your customers well when they understand that you care enough about the people that serve them, your employees, right? That you're trying to improve and increase their skills so that they can serve them better when you're not around, right? There's no point in having a pre-call plan or a pre-event plan if you then don't do a comparison at the end and review how do we do in respect of that plan, and then what we hear oftentimes is, well, ride-alongs are good theoretically, but who's got time? And my response to that is, of all the things you can do, this is the best use of a leader's time or a manager's time. So, you can put those in any order. They're not 1 to 7, right? They're not like the most important to the least important. I actually believe number 7 could easily be number 1. I could argue that with you if you want to invite me around for dinner.
I think so too, and that brings us to what is a ride along, why is it important, and how do we do these virtually? I think maybe younger people aren't familiar with the term ride along, but managers used to actually ride along in a car with their salespeople, right? And that's probably not happening in most cases at this point this year. But it's actually easier, and you spend less time doing ride-alongs because you don't have to travel to another city or travel to the venue. You can do a lot more ride-alongs virtually. So you want to talk about the ideal world we have now?
Yeah. So when we were naming the book, it's interesting because some people call them field accompaniments, and then you think, well, no one's out in the field anymore either, right? So it's tricky. But this principle of virtual ride-along, if you think about we tend to think that you have to be in a car, just as this image, side by side, going out into the world. We tend to think that, if we can't do this, then these things have to be quote unquote on hold until kind of COVID goes out of the way. But then, if you think about a pilot in a flight simulator, that they have to go in every year, and if they don't go in the flight simulation, don't get their hours where people are, checking their progress and making sure that they're up to standard, then they don't get to fly, right? They don't, if you're in the flight simulator and you crash a few times, they don't go, okay, well, fair enough, here's your keys, right? So they don't fly. So some people use a ride along as as a minimum standard, a level of quality, and I'm okay with that too. The fact that we are now all virtual, actually, as you say, Mike, makes it so much easier because we can actually, quote unquote, squeeze more in a day. That's not to say that they're a rushed thing, but what we can do as a manager is we can very much more kind of choose very much more easily the kind of ride along that we're going to accompany, right? So if you want, you can just say, hey, for the next 2 weeks, all I'm going to do, guys, is see how we're dealing with complaints, right? Which you couldn't do if you're getting on an aeroplane and going to somebody's territory, because you kind of get what you're given, right? So as a manager now with this virtual world, you can say, hey, let me see how we're doing with our close meetings, or let me see how we're doing with our qualification meetings. Let me see how we're dealing with complaints. Let me see how we're presenting, right? So the beauty of what we have now is the manager can be very much more selective. And that's not to say that all I want them to do is one thing. What I'm saying is that they can do more of them, more frequently, more regularly. And I would argue that most sales managers, most leaders, this should be part of their behavioral plan. I think that a sales manager should do a ride along at least every morning and at least every afternoon. I don't think there's any excuse for them not to do at least 1 or 2. And if this becomes their MO, right, their natural way, because your job as a manager is to improve the quality of your team, and there's no quicker way to do it than this.
So let's talk about it. How do we set up one of these ride-alongs? What it's a good way to make sure that both the manager and the salesperson are set up for success?
Okay, well, we're actually going to go through a model, kind of 2 acronyms that we'd like people to think about. So we're going to get to that in a few minutes, but really everybody needs to know what's the purpose, what are we trying to achieve, because we shouldn't be doing anything if we're not very clear about what we're trying to do. We should be very clear about what our agenda for the day is, and that just means that we've got to, why are we doing this? What are we trying to achieve? What are our primary objectives? What are our secondary objectives? Making sure that the manager and the individual knows exactly what they're doing. And by the way, ride-alongs are sometimes 3 or 4 people. I know I've just been speaking in 1s and 2s, right? It could be a demo, and you could be just riding along a demo as well. And then we also need to make sure that we're observing really well. So it's a real skill for managers to learn as well, a real skill, real active listening and recording stuff so that they're very specific with their feedback later. We can't give woolly feedback because woolly feedback isn't going to help anybody. And we also need to think about giving our people the right kind of mindset with it, which we call kind of the trust triad, which we'll get to in a second.
Yeah, so we have a tool here that we can talk about, but I specifically wanted to talk to you maybe about that purpose statement. I think that's one of the biggest ones we've already mentioned a couple of times, but what's a good reason to do a ride along? You've mentioned a few already. Is there, when you're setting that up with the salesperson, what do you want them to know about why you're there?
Well, it really depends what's going on, or, you know, I would like every ride along to be pursuant to a kind of development plan per individual, right? So there'll be certain individuals who may be new to an organization and it may be part of their onboarding, right? You could even, we talk in the book a little bit about sometimes it's the best way to get a manager kind of ready to become a manager, where they're doing some ride-alongs and they're kind of learning how to grow and develop, right? But I think it could be, you could be looking at somebody's statistics and just looking at the stats or the sales reports, and if they're struggling to close, we kind of think from our ivory tower, well, maybe this guy isn't very good at closing, but well, let's not go and guess, right? Let's go and observe what's really going on. So it really is, there's 1,000 reasons why you could do it, but I'm arguing in the book that you actually don't need a reason. You should be just, this is your MO, right? So
well, I love that because it reminded me of like performance reviews. If you do them annually, they're a big deal. They're a lot of stress. Same thing with role plays. If you say, tell me how you would start a call, and that's the first time they've ever role played, it feels awkward. It's a big deal. But if you're doing this every week and you're riding along at least once a month with your people, they just know that the purpose is to help you get better as a salesperson, not to catch you doing anything wrong, not to put you on the spot, and you don't have to polish anything up. Let's just work on some stuff, and that makes it a lot easier. And then I wanted to talk about this tool we have here. You can talk to your local Sandler trainer and download this one, but it's really just a simple agenda for the day. And I know you've talked about some cool things there that we don't want them to set up this day as something special. We want to observe them in their natural habitat. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, exactly. I think that, you know, what happens, I talk in the book, and it's one of my favorite pieces, but I'll be very short because I know we're short on time. So one of the first things I noticed when I first started doing ride-alongs, and I noticed that it became a very stage managed thing, right? Where the sales individual was like bringing their boss to kind of almost make a point. It could be like, you know, I need to have these guys understand how competitive it is out there. I know, I'll take them to all the people that complain about price, right? So the sales individual is using it, they're stage managing it, and they're even kind of giving a nod and a wink to their customers or clients and saying, hey, make sure when I come around with my boss, you tell him this, right? And it became a very stage managed thing. And I kind of likened it to, I know you and I spoke about this before in the past, Mike, but the Queen must think that the world smells of paint. So the nice lady on the stamps in England, right? She's the Queen, and everybody knows in advance where she's going and who she's going with, because she's a very busy lady and there's lots of things to arrange. And I'm sure, I mean, I don't know, I've never asked her, but I'm sure that 15 feet in front of her, everybody's sprucing the place up. And they're fresh lick of paint to everything and putting flowers around, and she must think that that's what the whole world looks like. And a lot of managers, sales managers, the sales individual is almost calling the shots, almost without actually overtly saying it, but they are really stage managing the day to get a point back to their boss. So coming back to your point, Mike, what I want our managers to do and our people to do is the most average day, not the most extraordinary day, not the most extraordinary issues, but the most average issues, so that the manager knows when they're not around what what's going on? You know, how are these people behaving, right? And of course, big issues have to be part of it, of course, right? Because that's part of a manager's job. Sometimes they have to be a bit like the Lone Ranger, right? And ride in and save the day. Rarely, not every time. If you find yourself doing that every time, you're being stage managed. You're being handled, as they say, right, in politics. So make sure that you're not. And also, last point, making sure that you balance the manager saying, am I participating in this? Like, am I taking an active role in this? Am I just observing? That's my favorite default. Or am I leading this? Am I actually going to show you how this is done? And that's my least favorite, right? So make sure not only what it is that we're trying to achieve, but what's the manager's role in it, and observing so that you can coach is the most important one for me.
That's huge in organizing your day, and you hit two great things there. But I even like, you know, maybe if they're a brand new sales rep, that first one is you showing them and mentoring them how to do it. But you know, like you said, yes, 5 years later, you should not be running the sales calls for them when you go out there. And then let's talk about this trust triad a little bit deeper, about how we protect our salespeople and make sure that they feel safe and supported on this call as we set up the day.
Yeah, I think that, you know, that the reality is we might feel a bit intimidated by our boss coming, and depends what kind of a boss you've got, right? So, but we have to really make sure that we're building trust so that people can be the most natural self. You know, you really should be almost like a fly in the wall. They should almost forget you're there, because you should say hello and ta-ta, and that's it, right? But first of all, you've got to make sure that in terms of the potency piece, right, that you're giving the other person the power to ask you lots of questions, right? So because they're there to learn from you too, right? So make sure that you give them permission, or potency rather than not the permission, but give them the power to ask you some questions. The permission piece is you've got to give them permission to fail, because if they're so nervous or worrying that, you know, they might do or say something wrong and you're going to pounce, right? You've got to give them permission to fail. In fact, Sandler rule, we have lots of our rules, and our number one rule is you have to learn to fail to win, right? So it's okay for somebody to learn how, you know, how to make a mistake, how to fail, as long as they learn from it, right? Some you win and some you learn. So long as you learn from it, and then part of the coaching piece is knowing now what we know and looking back, how might we have done that differently? So you've got to give them permission to fail, not about pouncing and jumping on them. And then the last piece is the protection, right? It's like no judgment. It's like making sure that what you're not looking for as a manager, and I have seen this, and it's dreadful when you see it, you're not looking for lots of gotcha moments, right? As soon as something's said, and they scribble that down, and that's all that they talk about, right? Because if you think about Tiger Woods or your Manchester City is my team, right? What they do is when they recognize that somebody has a weakness, they don't use that against them. They say, all right, how do we build on that? How do we improve that? And that's what they focus on, and that's what this is about. So if I can have the managers think one thing, right? If you only think one thing, it's not about this gotcha. Ride-alongs, this is a shield, not a sword, right? So it's to help them, it's to help them do better, quote unquote, in battle, and it's not for you to kind of find fault, right, and find reasons that to knock them down, because that's not how you build people up, by knocking them down, right?
No, I mean, that's just, to me, basic great leadership, no matter what you're doing. I remember when I had my first manager role was in a restaurant, and I was front of the house, and if something goes wrong with the meal, you can't blame anybody. You can't say, oh, the cook's messed up, because guess what? They're still the company. The client doesn't care. The client just had a messed up meal, right? So you can't blame your manager. You can't blame the company. You can't blame customer service or the warehouse or the engineers or whatever, marketing. No, it's the company's problem. You have to protect everybody in that scenario and not throw anybody under the bus.
It's you know, most people, and we talk about this again in the book, but most people, they come to work to do a good job. They don't think, I'll really stick it to the man today. They just want to go home unscathed and have a decent, you know, day's life. So let's imagine that most people, let's say 80% of the time, do great work, and 20% of the time they need some help. Most of the conversations that managers have with their people are about that 20%, not that great 80%, right? And you know, what gets rewarded gets repeated. So part of your managing, observing, don't just look for the bad stuff, look for the good stuff and reinforce that, right? So we're looking for both. Does that make sense?
I love it. We're going to zoom in again, and we're going to get to the first of our two acronyms that we're sharing here. And this is huge because people always say, hey, that sounds great, Antonio, but how do I do that? Of
Right.
course, I want my person to feel safe. Of course, I don't want to be a bully and beat them up about their mistakes. But when I see a mistake, I'm gonna say something. So how do we stay out of that trap?
So we have, yeah, great. So the process is, I think this is really important. We've kind of developed these two acronyms to help you work through it, right? And so Passport is the first one, then we have another one called Radar. And so it helps you structure as you're going through the day. And some things, again, in the book are kind of check, do, and some are do, check, and you know, that's all of that's explained. But basically, you shouldn't be doing a ride along if there isn't a plan. It's not just kind of go one, go the next, go the next, go the next, see you, right? So there's got to be a plan for the day. It doesn't have to be a day, it could be a half day, right? Or because it's now virtual, you don't have to go for 4 days, right? But basically, what's the plan? And the plan might be, for example, we're going to talk to one new prospect, we're going to talk to a very established customer, and we're going to talk about a complaint, right? For example, what's the 30,000-foot plan for the day? When we get to the end of this section as well, Mike, we're going to show them a form that talks how much time is all of this taking, right? It's a lot less than you think, right? But what's the plan for the day? And then what are the aims for the day? Well, in this call, our aim is that, and in this call, it's that, and so we know what a 30,000-foot view is, and we now know what a 10,000-foot view is. And then we're actually going to show up at a call, right? So we're about to go and do something. All right, well, what's our strategy for this call, right? Who's participating? Who's leading? Who's observing? What are we doing, right? How is that going to work? What's the strategy for the call? How many people might be in there, for example? So then we'll structure an upfront contract, right? Because we don't have any meetings without upfront contracts, right? We don't finish any without any. So we'll structure the upfront contract, and really that should have been done before the manager shows up. But then, whilst you're with the manager, before you get going, you practice those key elements. You know, like any sport, you go and see an orchestra, right? You're going to go to a musical. They all have a practice first, right? They don't just go straight into it, right? So that you practice the key elements in the car or on the desk or whatever, right, beforehand, and then you're in the call, right? So now it's observing everything. And it could be the salesperson observing everything, or it could be the manager observing everything, right? And recording everything. We have forms for this. Let's show you how to do that, which is in quite detail. You should be scribbling furiously. The beauty of the virtual ride along is you can just push the little record button, right? And you can then debrief it at your leisure, right? But if you are face to face, you can't push the record button. Scribble everything down, and specifically, you know, you said this, he said that kind of thing, not again to trap, but to reveal. And then obviously you got to thank the client or the prospect or the customer for having you there, right? Because it is an unusual situation. If you thank them for it and tell them when you'll be back again, right? A little upfront contract for when you're going to come back. That kind of structures what do you do up to and including the call. So that's kind of like the pre-piece. And then the radar piece is kind of the post piece, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so we wanted to show a couple of tools here, and I'll go ahead and put them up on the screen. But I wanted to respond to what you just said. Is I think the Passport is really cool because a lot of this stuff maybe happened organically sometimes when you're riding along and you have to drive 30 minutes to the client's office.
Right.
But
Right.
virtually now in 2020, you have to set 3 meetings. You have to have a Zoom call with your salesperson ahead of time. You have to do the meeting, and then you have to have a debrief session on the calendar. And 3 separate meetings sounds like a lot for one call. But if you don't do that, you're missing stuff that maybe you used to after the call on the way to lunch, be able to organically debrief these things. Maybe if you were really good, but now if you don't specifically set time for all those steps, you're going to miss some of them, right?
Yeah, and just to answer your point, it is I mean, there'll be lots of people that are listening that ride along is their normal MO, so they're completely cool with this. There'll be some that you know, maybe don't do it very often or probably do it poorly, as we've been talking about. And if you're not doing the pre-call plan and then the actual event and then the post-event review, then yeah, this is going to take more time. But so you're slowing down to significantly speed up, right? So I get it. This takes more management effort. But this is like sit-ups. The more you do of them, the slicker you get, the more practiced and rehearsed they are. And first, it's going to feel a bit cumbersome, and it's going to be difficult, and it's going to make your muscles hurt. But if this is your MO, right? This is the way you do things. Then there is no fast in terms of the return on investment of time to improve your people. This is it. This is your biggest return on investment in terms of time. So yeah, it's more time, but actually you'll find yourself having to do less compensating, less probably firing and hiring, right, and all of that good stuff.
Right, which is huge.
Time, right? Exactly.
So these tools, the sales call planning sheet just lays out the things you were talking about there. The reason we're having the meeting, what's going on with the client, my role as the manager, your role as the salesperson, anything we need to talk about ahead of time, the upfront contracts, special considerations. Where's the meeting? Are we doing Zoom? Are cameras on or off? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You can do.
Yeah.
Now we have these tools you can get from your Sandler trainer, but also a blank sheet of paper works really well for planning out a sales call if you just remember to ask these questions up front, right?
Sure, and if you're very techie, just stick it in an Excel spreadsheet or something, right? So that's fine too. Yeah.
And then this is a cool checklist that kind of just goes through what we typically think of as a sales process. So how did the meeting open? What happened during the meeting? What happened at the close of the meeting? And then the one I like here on this tool is the salesperson's demeanor. When did they change? Were they most uncomfortable opening or closing? Were they most uncomfortable asking questions or when they were challenged? That's a really good block here. How do you use this sales template checklist?
So actually, as I mentioned, I've been doing these a long time. Back in the olden days, right, when I used to go out and fill the ride-alongs on my dinosaur, because I'm ancient, we would have these as, what are they called? Like carbon paper? Right, so there were 3 copies, right? The first one was for like the file. The yellow one I think was for them, and the pink one was for me, right? And they built up over time. They build up into like a development file. How tremendous is it then, as you were talking earlier about, an annual performance development review, an annual development review, yeah. Instead of just having one conversation a year, you can pull this file out, either actually physically or virtually, right? And actually see their progress, see how they're developing, see how well they're doing. It's tremendous for that. So please keep good records, right? Yeah. It's not just for the gotcha moments, which is what we say, good, right? It's not for that at all. We need to think we're helping our people. And these records are tremendous. They don't have to be, as you said, just a piece of paper or an Excel spreadsheet, but please find a way. Just photocopy them. They're in the book,
yeah, put these fields in your CRM so you don't even have to keep track of them.
Exactly. And for every salesperson, and we do assessments as well of people, don't we, right? So we identify particular areas for improvement, and it could be equal business stature, for example. Then if our assessments are pointing to maybe some development need there, then we can make special emphasis of it here. Plus, once you've done one ride along and we've found some particular things to work on, we have to record those so that the next time you swoop in, right, you go straight back to that and say, hey, do you remember last time we were working on this? And so let's pay particular attention to that. So I know we think of checklists as a bit of a drag, but they are the way that we track growth.
And that takes us right to the radar. So after the call or at the end of the day on the ride along, we have some other steps that we need to make sure we check off.
Sure. So that was all kind of before and during, and then afterwards we've got 2 things to review. We've either got to review that particular call or review the day or the half day, right? So if we've got 3 or 4 to be done, we'll do a very quick review, which we'll talk about in a second. And then at the end of the day, we'll do a longer review. So we've got to review the call, and then we've also got to review the day. When we do that, we're agreeing what were the key points. We're debriefing what the outcomes were. We're agreeing the key issues that we need to concentrate on for the next call or for the next day that you're together. And again, you're recording next steps, and everybody's signing and agreeing to what they're agreeing to. So let's just talk about this review before we just move on. Top Gun. I love this story. So you know, not the movie, right, but the real place. There's a place called Top Gun, yeah, where they teach aviators, right, who are the best in the world to get there. So they're not teaching them how to fly a plane because they already know how to fly a fighter plane, right? What are they teaching them? Well, they're actually teaching them how to deal with difficult situations, right? That's what they're teaching them, not how to fly a plane. Your guys should know how to sell, right? What you're looking for is the little bits of friction, the little bits of, you know, development areas. So when they go to Top Gun and they say, okay, guys, here's what the scenario looks like. You're going to come in at 300 feet from the west, and you're coming at Mach 1. You're coming in at 900 feet from the east at Mach 1. You're going to see each other and then have a dogfight, right? So then they do that. One tries to, you know, quote unquote, get the other one, kill the other one, and then they land. They land probably about each one of those dogfights takes about 5, 6, 7 minutes. They're not doing that for an hour like it looks on the movies. It's about 5 or 6 minutes. One of you is typically dead after 5 or 6 minutes. So then they'll go and review. So they'll have a pre-event plan, very short, probably takes them about 20 minutes. They'll do the thing for about 6 minutes, and then the review is 45 minutes for every minute the engagement. Wow. Why? Because actually the magic is in the coaching piece. The magic piece isn't in the front bit. It isn't in the middle bit whilst you're in the meeting. The magic's the review. That's where all the coaching happens. That's where all the stuff gets revealed. So you pay more attention to this. And again, I'm going to use a military analogy in a minute, talk about, well, how do you review the call and then how do you review the day? So I think we just jump forward a slide.
Yeah, let's do that. But I think Top Gun 2 was supposed to come out this year. I don't know what happened with the pandemic, but I'm looking forward to that. That'll be fun. So yeah, the two types of reviews that you can do here, and both are important.
Yeah, so when we said the review of the meeting and then the review of the day or the half day or whatever, so the military, you know, if the military say, hey, let's go take that building, for example, they don't, you know, so you've got a squad of, I don't know, 15, 20 men. You don't go, let's go take that building, guys. Charge, right? They'll have a plan. They'll go, let's go take that building or the hill or whatever. Clearly, I'm not a military person, but they'll have a plan. They'll say, how do we get these tanks across that river? They don't just go charge, right? Like my dad putting up shelves. Putting up shelves. It's like it's a perfect. It's a study in not planning, right? So and it always takes twice as long, it's half as good, and costs twice as much, right? So the military don't just go charge, they have a plan. Then as they're doing the thing, obviously it's a very active environment, and you know, plans possibly change. But then what they do is, as soon as they've captured the building, they do what they call a hot wash whilst the guns are still hot, getting all the grime off the guns. And it's a very quick, okay guys, we did it, let's review. What did we learn whilst we were doing that thing just now, right? Because there's always something to learn. That's the hot wash. What they then do is, when things have cooled down a little bit, when all the weapons are now cold, and when everybody's like, all of the emotions have died down a bit, they then have a cold wash. And interestingly, they ask the same questions. They ask who, what, where, right? For each of those, like who did what did we learn, where did we go wrong, where did we do well? So they'll have this short review, and then they'll have this longer review. So the short review is that meeting, and then what do we think about for the next time? And then the longer review is all of those meetings, not the individual, but what did we learn in meeting 1, what did we learn in meeting 2, what did we learn in meeting 3? So it's like very, very precise, and then it's a little bit bigger. So we start big, we go very, very small, and then after the meeting, we go small, and then we go big. So it's almost like an egg timer, I guess.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense, and I love both, because you you do have some takeaways in the moment, that hot wash where you're like, man, but the adrenaline's still pumping. You still might have happy years, right? If you're a salesperson and say, wow, we did so great. And it was really good. I impressed my boss. And then the cold wash a few weeks later, maybe things changed. Maybe that what you thought was an agreement wasn't an agreement, or you go back and you go, thinking about it, they didn't actually say they were going to buy. They said they were going to think about it. And things change once that adrenaline wears off and you come back to reality. So we have some tips, and we're going to zoom in here too on how you do these review processes. So first, some quick tips about what your goal as a manager should be, and then we're going to look at some actual questions you can use that might help you get better discussions after the reviews.
Yeah, if you remember earlier, that triangle where we said you manage behaviors, you coach attitudes and belief, and you train skills, right? So what we're actually looking for, we're looking for either good or not so good behaviors. This is really when we're doing this observing piece, and we're recording everything piece. And again, if it's virtual, it's great because you can just push record. Quick point on that: if wherever you can, make sure that the cameras are on, guys. I've been to so many where they're not. And communication is not only tonality and words, but it's also body language, and you're missing some of that. So if you're doing a virtual ride along, I was going to mention it earlier and I forgot, wherever possible, have the cameras on. Now, sometimes you're riding along a call, an incoming call or an outgoing call, that's a different thing, but wherever possible, make sure that you do that. Okay, so your job as a coach, right? I guess the best way, I wrote an article recently, it was in Forbes, and I asked the reader, I said, who's the best coach you've ever had, right? And the responses were great. Or who's the best coach you've ever seen? I think that was the question. And people mentioned, I confess, lots of American coaches that I don't know who they were. And I must have had 40 or 50 responses to who's the best coach you've ever seen. And I would argue, and I do argue, that the best coach anyone has ever seen is likely your mum, right? It's likely because she helped you learn how to walk and talk and read and write and use a fork. And forks are tricky, right? But your mother, her interest, she was more interested in your development than potentially her own comfort oftentimes, right? If it's anything like my mum, right? Very, very selfless. And all she wanted was the very, very best for me. And so when I was young and learning all of this stuff, right? Very nurturing. Right, not at all aggressive, and they got to that when I was 18, and I was a pain in the backside. but right, so your parents or somebody that loved you when you were young, they were the best coach that you had, and typically people responded to those teachers best, that were really nurturing and not kind of like using the rod as opposed to the carrot. So your job is to be analytical, sure, record everything, sure, but it's also, I want to come from this point of nurturing tonality, right? It's not about authoritative parent or critical parent, right? Nor is it little professor, right down in the other end of the transactional analysis. Ego state. If anybody doesn't know what I'm talking about, Torty Sandler trainer, they'll explain all of that. It's also mentioned too in the book. So we want people that are very nurturing because we want the manager or the leader, to come from the right perspective on this. So it's not about being judgmental. It's about helping as much as possible. State your observations, good and bad. That's really important. Express your concerns, but what we've got to make sure that we don't do is we don't come out of that coaching area, because what often we see as a manager will use the right kind of set of eyes, right, from a coaching perspective, and as soon as they see something, they dive into management mode to try and fix that thing, and that's the mistake they make. So they come from a good place, and then they flip over into management. Because why? Because that's what they know best. Half of our time with management and with managers is teaching them how to coach, right? Coaching them how to coach. So ask lots of questions, because it's a process of guided discovery, not a process of telling. Coaching isn't telling, right? It's a process of guided discovery. We've got to really make sure that we're getting the other person's perspective, right? Because as the Dutch philosopher Spinoza said, no matter how thinly you slice anything, there's always two sides, right? So it's one perspective, but we also need the other perspective. And then it's agreed, not, I know the sign says the slices identify areas for improvement. I should have said agree areas for improvement, my fault. So it's identify areas for improvement, but then agree areas for improvement. Because you think of yourself almost like as a doctor, taking a full history, right? In a very nurturing tonality, because you want to know everything's going on. So exactly, that's a really good point. So you could say, hey Frank, when you did that, you should have done this. When I say you could say, that's not giving you permission to say. That's what a manager would say, not a coach. A manager would say, when you did this, you should have done that, because that's just the use of directed authority. That's giving them behaviors to do. It's much better to say, I noticed that you said this, or I noticed that you said that, or you did this, or you did that. Help me understand what was the thinking behind that. And again, it's not as a gotcha, it's like, help me understand your thinking. And there are a ton of questions in the book, like, so if we had our opportunity to do that again, what might we have done or said differently? We're all human. How many times I've been in a conversation and driving away, or, later on thinking, when he said that, I should have said this, and I wish I'd said that, and I didn't say, right? So what we're doing is we're facilitating that, right? This self-discovery of looking back, and hindsight's 2020 vision, right? When I said that and he responded this way, what do you think? How could you have maybe positioned that slightly differently? That's the conversation I want us to have. It's a coaching conversation. I sense that the prospect was this. What do you sense? I think that. Well, what makes you say that? That's a really good point. How do you think we could make the next call come to the same conclusion? Well, I'll need to make sure that my upfront contract says this. Why do you say that? Because of this reason. Great idea, right? So it's a coaching conversation. And it's about sensing and feeling and emotions, but it's also about, hey, none of us are perfect. We're all on we're all trying to improve, including the manager, including the coach, right? So we're all trying to get better. It's a very symbiotic thing. You are helping them, and guess what? They're helping you at the same time.
Well, I like that, and I mean, it's pretty simple there. You want open-ended questions. You want them to tell you what they did, or why they did it, or where they thought they could be better. And if you start accusing people, or you start jumping in, I didn't like when this happened, that creates defensive walls. But if you ask something like, hey, I thought the call went great, but if we had to do it over again, what would we change? How could we do that better? That's a different question that says, that might have been as good as we know, but after the call now, we have hindsight. We know that we asked this question late and we probably should have asked it earlier. So I'm glad you got that question in there. But if we had done this differently, how could we have run a better call? Those to me are more interesting discussions than, say this, don't say that.
Oh, exactly, which is, you're showing them how to ride a bike and that's not teaching them how to ride a bike. This is the format I was talking about. People have been listening to this thinking, oh my God, this sounds so complex. And it's a process, and it's a complex thing that you're trying to help somebody get better at. So it has to have some element of complexity to it. But actually, it's not nearly as onerous as you think, right? So you've got this stage one, and again, I'm not trying to push the book terribly, but this is all detailed in there.
So we can take a screenshot right now. Just take a screenshot of the screen. You can save it too. We don't have to buy the book. Yeah.
We've got this passport and radar, right? So stage one is plan for the day. That's 5 minutes, right? It's not an hour, right? It's 5 minutes. What's the aims for the day? 10 minutes. That's it, right? Stage two is the pre-call plan in front of every plan, right? In front of every call, I'm sorry. What's the strategy call? 5 minutes. What's the upfront contract? 5 minutes. Practice those key pieces, 10 minutes. And then, well, who knows how long the meeting is? You're observing and recording everything. And then the thanks, right? You've got to thank the prospect or the client or the other person for having you around, because, you could be a bit intimidating sometimes, right? So thank them. And then we've got this debrief, right? So you're reviewing the call, 5 minutes. That's the hot wash, remember? And then at the end of the day or at the end of the week or whatever, it's the cold wash, right? That's a 30-minute thing. So agree to key points, do the debrief, next shift. That's what it looks like. So yeah, it's probably taking you, right? If you're going to do a day when you're maybe doing 2 calls in the morning and maybe 2 calls in the afternoon, right? You probably, you're tagging on maybe an hour to the day. But in terms of the return on that hour's investment, they're going to learn more in that hour than they did in the 6 hours having all of the meetings.
It's huge. I think that does seem like a lot of steps, but like you said, a lot of these are quick. And once you get into the routine of this, you just know that it's there. So
Yeah.
you're setting aside time for it. You can run through it. And if all the aims for all the calls are the same and they're always prospecting calls, then those get pretty quick.
Yeah.
Right. But if you're working with salespeople that handle from, the beginning of prospecting, opening call all the way to a close, then you probably have a lot of different meetings and you need to take the time to figure out where that is and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, we have a client who are a big tech client, and when they're doing a demo, so they'll have the salesperson who did all kind of like the sales piece, and then the demo, right, and then they'll do another sales piece at the end of it, and a meeting can take 3 or 4 hours just for one meeting, and so this really helps them get the most out of that because there is so much going on. It's like the Top Gun. It's a very fast-moving, fast-paced environment. So yeah.
And I think that really, to sum it all up and get your final thoughts here, we have just a couple of minutes left. And I could put up the link again at sandler.com/ride-along. But we want to ask you, when's your next ride along? When's your next virtual or live field visit? When are you going to get out there and use this stuff? And for me, Antonio, I think it needs to be right away, just like any good technique. Once you hear about this, start the cadence and then do it all of the time. A little bit all the time makes huge compound interest level gains at the end of the year, rather than trying to say, okay, I'm going to do all my ride-alongs in October because that's when it is, and then next October we'll do it again. That doesn't work. It's like working out a muscle, right?
Yeah, I think the best way for me to describe it is, if you're a manager or a leader, you've got a job, right? Your job is to improve results, 1, by building a team of people, 2, who are self-sufficient, who can get on with things when you're not around, with a high degree of skill and a high degree of motivation. It's those 5 things: improve results, team of people who are self-sufficient with a high degree of skill and a high degree of motivation. Ride-alongs feed all of those things, right? So if that's your job, and that is your job, I don't care what the title says on the business card, that's your job. Improve results, team of people, high degree of skill, high degree of motivation, and a high degree of self-sufficiency. Ride-alongs fix, if that's the right word, inform all of those things. So when is your next ride-along? If anybody answered in 6 months' time, then they're not my friends anymore.
Oh no. Yeah. Well, since we don't actually, know anybody on here, we didn't see anybody type that in. We'll be okay. We'll let that slide. But we want to thank you for attending. We shared a lot of stuff. There's a lot of tools. There's a lot in the book we couldn't cover today, and we apologize for not squeezing it all in here. But hopefully you got some great takeaways, new attitudes, new behaviors, techniques that you can use to help coach up your team. If you want to learn more, go to sandler.com/ride-along. And Antonio also wrote 2 books, by the way. So the new one is the 21st Century Ride-Along. You can find that at shop.sandler.com or Amazon. And his first book, Asking Questions the Sandler Way, is available there as well. And that has over 100 different questions your salespeople could be asking on a call and how to use them appropriately. Another great resource for you there. Antonio, anything we missed? Any final thoughts on ride-alongs or specifically tactical coaching here in the virtual world? I know we didn't highlight a whole lot of virtual stuff, but it is a little bit different. It can just make people feel uncomfortable, but I think what we showed here today is it can all still be done. you're
Right.
just doing those same things a little bit differently than you were 8 months ago.
I'll just say this. I think that the book is split into 3 parts. The first third, I nearly said the first half, it's in 3 parts in the first half. The first third is about how do you as a leader and a manager, how do you deal with the day? But I don't want you to think that this book is only for leaders and managers, because the second third is all about how you as a sales professional get the most out of being with your boss for the day, right? So it's for you too. And then the last piece is about leaders and the C-suite, because the higher up you go in the pyramid, the less opportunities you have for someone to ride along with you. So it's how does the C-suite use the ride along and have people giving those chaps feedback, because that's in short supply, right? So I think wherever you are kind of in the food chain, what a terrible way to describe it, wherever you are, I think the book is written for the sales professional, the sales leader professional, and the CEO C-suite guy as well. So there's something in there for everybody, I think.
I appreciate it. Antonio, thanks for putting the hard work into the book, joining us here for the webinar today, and everything else you do to help us keep salespeople moving and keep managers moving up. So thank you, and thank you in the audience for attending today. Whatever you are, be a good one. Good luck and good selling. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.